Hi, I'm Shay, a Pokemon official TCG caster, and today I'm going to tell you a story of the most hated deck in Pokemon history, a deck that all the player base hated, and even the card creators themselves hated it just as much. But even though they tried to stop the deck, turned out it was just too strong, and it was fully unstoppable. Let's get started. When Fusion Strike came out, everyone could appreciate just how strong Mew VMAX was. It had two very usable attacks, the first being Cross Fusion Strike. For 2 energy, or 1 double turbo energy attachment, you could use any one of your Fusion Strike Pokemon's attacks as this attack. Now keep that in mind, because we'll be running through the attacks later on a little bit. But for now though, I want to draw your attention to Max Miracle, Mew VMAX's second attack, that did 130 damage, and went through all effects on your opponent's active Pokemon. This meant it could shred through cards like Miltank, who are normally immune to V Pokemon. This made it very hard to wall Mew VMAX. If Mew VMAX was the star of the show though, that meant Genesect V was the muscle of the deck. With its Fusion Strike system ability, it was able to draw Mew players a ton of cards, since you could draw up to the amount of Fusion Strike Pokemon you had in play. This meant if you had 0 cards in your hand and 6 Fusion Strike Pokemon in play, you would draw 6 cards. And bear in mind, you could use multiple Genesect V in a single turn, so you could easily draw like 20 cards a turn. Genesect V also helped out with its attack, Techno Blast, which provided Mew VMAX with a solid 210 damage. While that doesn't sound too impactful, bear in mind cards like Power Tablet, which was an item card that would increase the Fusion Strike Pokemon's damage this turn by 30 for each one you played. This meant if you could find 3 damage modifiers in a turn like Power Tablets or Choice Belt, you could now hit 280 damage, which was enough to KO most of the metagame in one hit, like all the V-Star cards like Arceus and Palkia. This left Mew players in a commanding position, since if they won the coin flip, they could put on a ton of offensive pressure by KOing the V Pokemon before they would evolve. And bear in mind, Mew VMAX was scarily consistent because it was drawing so many cards from Genesect V. Going second though, it could be argued that Mew VMAX was even scarier, since you could unleash the power of Meloetta. Meloetta had the Melodious Echo attack, which could easily swing for 240 damage on your very first turn of the game. How? Well, you see, it did 70 damage for each Fusion Strike energy you had in play. This meant if you attached 1 Fusion Strike energy from your hand for the turn, and then played Lesser Sparkle, you could grab 2 more Fusion energy from your deck and attach them to your Pokemon. This meant if you played a single damage modifier from earlier, you could now KO a Palkia V or an Arceus V on your very first turn of the game. This could lead to massive snowball games where your opponent was never really going to be able to win, or even lead to non-start games because Meloetta could easily KO your opponent's only Pokemon. Remember Cross Fusion Strike from earlier though, from Mew VMAX? Well, if you ever got 4 Fusion Strike energy in play, Melodious Echo would start off at a table-shattering 280 damage, making for V-Star knockouts, and even VMAX knockouts realistically, look like a walk in the park. The power level of Mew VMAX quite honestly is unprecedented. Never before have we seen a deck that can draw so many cards, can one-shot everything, and have loads of tips and tricks like Psychic Leap to heal damage, Glistening Droplets to spread damage, or a Choreo to make Mew VMAX even tankier. Quite honestly, it was insane. But while the power level was high on these early Mew VMAX decks, they definitely were not optimal, with some lists playing draw supporters like Professor's Research and Marnie, and even basic energy. Sometimes you would even see attackers like Deoxys, who would deal 160 if it had a Fusion Strike energy attached, and Latias, who would make itself immune to damage from VMAX Pokemon. These kinda saw a little bit of play early on, because remember, at the very least, Mew VMAX could copy all those attacks anyway. This led to the deck being strong, but arguably clunky. That was all set to change on the 22nd of March 2022, however, when Natalie Miller and her testing group showed the world how to play Mew VMAX, because she won the Melbourne Regional, with a list that played no basic energy, no draw supporters, meaning we were fully reliant on double turbo energy, Fusion Strike energy and a Lesser Sparkle to attack, and Fusion Strike system was the only way to draw cards. This let Natalie fill the deck with consistency cards like max copies of Rotom Foam, Cramomatic, and Oricorio to reduce that damage as well. And it was this style of Mew VMAX we saw dominate the early 2023 metagame, with some lists even starting to incorporate Pokemon catchers to make that turn 1 Meloetta even more scarier, because you could essentially play Lesser Sparkle and Boss's orders on the same turn. This led to the community hating Mew VMAX, because it felt like there was nothing you could do about getting early Meloetta KO'd. For example, I was a Mew VMAX player, and I knew if I got a turn 1 2 prize KO with Meloetta, I was so far ahead because my opponent had to deal with the Meloetta, because if they didn't, it could just swing again, meaning it was very hard for me to lose that prize advantage. On top of that, even if Mew VMAX started to fall back in some games for whatever reason, you was only ever a 4 power tablet turn from catapulting yourself back into the lead, something that wasn't unheard of with Genesec's draw power. All of this made Mew VMAX easily the best deck in format, or at the very least a top 3 deck in format, resulting in a top 8 placement at the London World Championships 2022, winning the Bilbao Special Event, Brisbane from Natalie from earlier, Santiago, along with multiple other regional top cuts as well. Funnily enough though, the Mew VMAX deck was set to change in a drastic way, even with all this success. And we really didn't have to look far to go see how it was going to change, because at the London Open, which was run at the same time as the World Championships, and the Bilbao Special Event, which was the event after Worlds, Michael Pramawat and Christian Thiomy were pioneering a new style of Mew VMAX deck, one that would turn up the consistency of Mew VMAX to unparalleled levels. And Christian, well, he was doing that whilst also adding a slightly disruptive option to the deck as well, something that we had never even considered at the time, and it made Mew VMAX even more terrifying. Let's have a look. See, if we were to look at this deck list, 5th place London Open deck list from Michael Pramawat, his list had a bunch of strange cards in it that we really wasn't used to seeing traditionally in the archetype. Cards like Avery, Pokestop and Silene. Let's look at these in detail. Avery was a bit naughty, a supporter card that would force your opponent to discard their benched Pokemon until they had 3 left. This could be disastrous for your opponent if used in combination with Escape Rope, since you're effectively removing their backup options whilst KOing the active. And worth noting, Palkia V-Star was arguably the best deck at the time, and that needed a full bench of Pokemon to one-shot a Mew VMAX. Avery would stop that. It was also a monstrous mirror tech, because if you was on the receiving end of this as a Mew VMAX player, you would have to discard your Genesect Vs, which would really limit your draw power throughout the rest of the game. Pokestop was a new card from the Pokemon Go set at the time. A stadium that would let you discard the top 3 cards of your deck, and any items you discarded from that way, you could put into your hand. Anytime non-supporter trainers can turbo things into your hand, you have to take them seriously, and you would be hard pressed to find a better Pokestop deck than Mew VMAX, since all the downsides of Pokestop is largely mitigated, since Mew VMAX played very little Pokemon, very little supporters, but it played a ton of items, meaning Pokestop was highly likely to accelerate resources into your hand. Cards like Power Tablet, Switching cards, or even Cross Switcher, that was a new card that Michael Pramawat played. It was an item that could only be played if you played 2 of these from your hand at the same time. If you did, you could swap your opponent's active and you'd swap yours as well. This was deadly in Mew VMAX, because not only would you get to KO exactly what you wanted on your opponent's side of the board, but you'd also reset your Techno Blast effect as well, so you could attack with the same Mew VMAX if you wanted to. Silene is the last card I want to draw your attention to here. A supporter card that would let you flip 2 coins, and for each heads you would take a card from your discard pile and put it to the top of your deck. So to be fair, 25% of the time this was useless. However, the other 75% of the time, it would let you do something that was previously impossible in the Mew VMAX archetype, and that is get extra uses of Power Tablet. Silene would let you be a little bit more liberal with your discarding, since now you had a way to get those resources back, because remember, anything you put to the top of the deck you could easily draw with Genesect V. So with all these new additions though, what ended up getting cut from the deck? Because remember, Mew VMAX was a well-oiled machine even before these additions. Well, Michael Pramawat cut the whole Fusion Strike package. So, a Lesser Sparkle, Meloetta and the Fusion energies. And bear in mind, this was happening on the very same day Andre Chieson was getting a top 8 finish at the World Championships with all those cards in it. But with Pramawat's popularity in the community and an incredible finish with this turbo version, this immediately started to see more play than the old Fusion Strike style build, with it getting 2nd place, 5th place, 7th place, 21st and 32nd at the next US regional about a month later in Baltimore, with the highest Fusion Strike style build only getting 23rd. So with that in mind, you would think that the community would run with this new USA style all gas no brakes Mew VMAX deck, right? Because it seemed to replace the Fusion style build almost immediately, to be honest. Well, it's not quite that simple, because I mentioned Christian Thiomy earlier, a Finnish player who has taken the Mew VMAX deck in a whole new direction, one that nobody could realistically see coming. You see, during this time, Mew VMAX's biggest weakness was Path to the Peak, a stadium card. While it was in play, it would turn off all rule box Pokemon's abilities. A rule box Pokemon is a card that has a rule box on it, so like V Pokemon, let's say this Pokemon give up 2 prize cards for example. So with Path to the Peak in play, you would shut off all VMAX Pokemon, V Pokemon and Radiant Pokemon. This meant this single stadium card would stop all Genesect V from drawing cards. And since Mew VMAX decks would only play Genesect V to draw cards traditionally, quite honestly a single Path to the Peak could be terrifying. So as you can imagine, this was the bane of Mew VMAX players, and was one of the large reasons why Mew decks had to play 4 stadiums, so they had maximum chances to bounce a path if it ever came down. So when Christian Thiomi got top 8 at the Bilbao Special, which was the first European event after 2022 Worlds, with a Path to the Peak in his deck, everyone was stunned. But quite honestly, it made a lot of sense. Since people weren't used to Mew VMAX being the disruptive deck, a well-timed Marnie, or even Roxanne, to reduce your opponent's hand size after they KO'd a Mew VMAX, plus Path to the Peak, could really set your opponents back. And while this was more of a proof of concept, with Christian's deck largely operating like the aggro US version with a couple disruptive elements added, little did the player base know that fast forwarding a few months, the Mew VMAX archetype would have to massively change again, since the best deck of all time was about to enter the metagame and stomp everything around it mercilessly. However, Mew VMAX was one of the only decks that could stand toe to toe with it, although he did need some massive changes to compete. You see, Lugia V-Star has now stepped into the format, and in my opinion it's the strongest deck of all time. It relied on this downright ridiculous ability Primal Turbo from Archeops, which should let you attach 2 special energy from your deck to one of your Pokemon once per turn. Normally special energy cards tend to have more powerful effects than normal energy cards. Like for example, Aurora Energy can be any type of energy while it's attached to a Pokemon, or V-Guard Energy would reduce damage done by V Pokemon to the Pokemon it's attached to. These extra effects are balanced with the fact that you can only run 4 of these in your deck, and you can only ever attach 1 of these from your hand per turn, meaning not only would you have to draw into them, but you'd have to attach them from your hand to get any benefit, right? Primal Turbo just yeeted those balancing factors straight out of the water, since now you could get 2 of these in play from your deck immediately. Now, to be fair, it should be hard for people to get Archeops into play, because it's a stage 2 and it's a fossil. These kind of cards almost never see competitive play. However, this is where Lugia V-Star would step in, with its Summoning Star ability, that would once per game let you grab 2 colorless Pokemon from your discard pile and put them straight into play. Meaning all you had to do was get 2 Archeops in your discard pile turn 1, and then turn 2 you could plonk them straight into play with Lugia V-Star, and now you would have 4 special energy from your deck to attach in a single turn. Do you know how silly that is? And with all the special energy cards in format at the time, like Aurora Energy, we mentioned earlier, Powerful Energy, which would boost the colorless Pokemon's damage by 20 for each one attached, and bear in mind Lugia V-Star had a very good attack Tempest dive that would start off at 220, so with enough Powerful Energy, you'd actually start to one-shot stuff. V-Guard Energy, mentioned earlier, and Hiding Dark and Special Lightnings, just to act as extra copies of Aurora Energy. This made Lugia V-Star objectively the best deck in format, and in my opinion there was zero reason to not play it, resulting in Lugia V-Star making up 50% of the metagame. However, Mew VMAX was still occupying 15% of the metagame at the time, and it was one deck that could stand up to Lugia V-Star and it could beat it. However, it took some work. You see, what Mew VMAX players had to do was fully lean into the Path to the Peak stadium that we mentioned earlier, because by sticking it every turn against Lugia V-Star, they could never use Summoning Star. And if they can't use Summoning Star, that means they can't put Archeops into play. If they can't put Archeops into play, well, it's not a very good deck to be honest. And then you can just keep announcing Techno Blast to win the game. And by using high counts of Lost Vacuum, Mew players could stick a Path to the Peak, hope their opponent couldn't do anything about it, then they could Lost Vacuum away the Path to the Peak, draw a lot of cards, play a Marnie or a Judge to reduce their opponent's hand size, then stick another Path to the Peak down and KO something. If the Lugia player couldn't ever replace the stadium, Mew VMAX would win. It was a dicey strategy, sure, but it did work. And this is how Mew VMAX was able to weather the Lugia V-Star storm and remain a top 3 deck in format at the time. It wasn't all doom and gloom for Mew VMAX players though, since they were given a huge buff in the Forest Sealstone Tool card, which could be attached to any V Pokemon, and it would give that Pokemon a once per game V-Star power ability, Star Alchemy, which would let you search your deck for any card and put it in your hand. This could even be used under Path to the Peak, which basically gave Mew VMAX players a get out of jail free card once per game. But make no mistake about it, Mew VMAX identity has now changed. From the super aggressive Meloetta days, in my opinion it was now a timid, defensive deck, especially since Creatures had had enough of Mew VMAX and released one of the hardest on the nose counter cards I have ever seen. A card that would one-shot a Mew VMAX for 0 energy, and it was a basic Pokemon as well. Mew VMAX players needed Path to the Peak to even have a chance of not insta-folding to that card. Before that though, Creatures had released a few Mew VMAX counters already, because I think they realised just how dominant Mew VMAX was. However, those early counters just weren't good enough, because Mew VMAX was just bobbing them anyway. Like first up we had Darkrai V-Star, a V-Star Pokemon who would deal 30 damage plus 30 for each dark energy attached to all your Pokemon. This sounds good because it hits Mew VMAX for weakness, right? True, except it was a 2-prize focus deck, meaning Meloetta could just offset the prize trade immediately, and the turbo builds were just more consistent and faster at taking the first KO, meaning Darkrai was just slower out the gates. So it flopped. Hisuian Samurott V-Star fell into a similar camp, dealing 220 damage with Dark typing is nice, and it had a better chance against the field than Darkrai, but it still wasn't good enough to be a real meta deck. Mightyena was a threat though, and it did need to be taken seriously, because it was a 1-prize Pokemon, so that means Meloetta didn't instantly just invalidate it, and with its Hustle Bark ability it could attack for 0 energy, which was very nice, and with its Dark typing it would actually one-shot a Mew VMAX for 0 energy on a 1-prize Pokemon. However, since it was a stage 1, and it was pretty much useless against the rest of the field, it didn't see much play, because let's say your opponent put down a Poochyena, you would know as a Mew VMAX player you have to judge them instantly to make sure they couldn't get the Mightyena, and if they couldn't, well, you were laughing. You see, it was Mew VMAX's combination of consistency with Genesect V, hand disruption via Marnie and Judge, and Meloetta to offset prize trade that made it very hard to hard counter Mew VMAX. Until Creatures just thought, you know what, I've had enough, let's print Drapion V. A basic Pokemon whose attack would get reduced by 1 colorless energy for each single strike, rapid strike or fusion strike Pokemon your opponent had in play, and its attack, Dynamic Tail, would deal 190 damage. So against Mew VMAX it would attack for free and deal enough damage to one-shot a Mew VMAX even with V-Guard energy. This was the real deal, because it was a basic Pokemon. So that means it was much easier to find space in decks for, especially if you played Pokemon Recovery like Super Rod so you could reuse it. Because remember, you'd only have to attack with Drapion V twice to win the game, because Mew VMAX would give up 3 prize cards. The only defense Mew VMAX players had against this was Path to the Peak, since the Stadium would turn off the Wild Style ability. So Mew VMAX players had to lean into this strategy if they wanted to survive. We even saw Ancient Mew starting to see play. No, not that one. It was a variant that would use Aerodactyl V-Star of all things. This had the Ancient Star V-Star power that would turn off all V Pokemon's abilities whilst it was in play. So now against Lugia V-Star, and Drapion decks I guess as well, you would use Path to the Peak first, and after that you'd try and weave in Aerodactyl V-Star. So even if your path got replaced, you were technically fine. And this actually did work kind of well. Mew VMAX players started to get even more creative because we saw cards like Dreepy start to see play. Since Lugia V-Star players would often use Punkaboo to replace Path to the Peak, because its ability meant when it came into play you could discard a Stadium. So this seems good, right? You would use Punkaboo, replace the Stadium, use Summoning Star, then you're off to the races. However, as a Mew player, you could boss his orders up Punkaboo, then use Mew VMAX with a DTE attached to copy Infestation from Dreepy. This meant Infestation was now doing 0 damage thanks to the DTE, and it also meant that Punkaboo couldn't retreat. And since Lugia V-Star decks at the time didn't play any switching cards, that meant Punkaboo was stuck there for the rest of the game, and you would eventually deck out the Lugia V-Star players. Very fun. And even though it was Lugia V-Star's format and Drapion V was cutting about in loads of other decks, Mew still pulled in some big finishes, like 3rd place at EUYC 2023, 3rd place at OCRC 2023, winning Melbourne, 1st place Liverpool Regionals, 2nd place San Diego Regionals, and 1st place at Cape Town and Johannesburg Regionals as well. As well as a very strange weekend where Fusion Mew of all things had a resurgence, winning 3 events on the same weekend. This success though led the player base to hate Mew VMAX for a completely different reason now, since now it was winning games by essentially making your opponent well, not be able to play the game, because you were bricking them either with Marnie or Judge, or sticking path for the whole game, so your opponent couldn't really do anything. And to be honest, these were kind of semi-gimmick strategies that aren't fun to play against, especially Ancient Star or Dreepu. Creatures seeing this decided to print some more counters for Mew VMAX. Klefki came out in Scarlet Violet base set, and it was set to counter Mew by targeting the Genesect's draw power, something they actually haven't tried to do yet. Since while it was in the active, all basic Pokemon in play had no abilities. This meant Genesect couldn't draw cards. But since Klefki had to be in the active for this to work, and it wasn't really good at attacking, it didn't really see a lot of play out the gates. Creatures wasn't done though, because they were set to release a big old boy, Charizard EX, who was printed as a Terra Dark type, who I am convinced the only reason this was to make it so Charizard could one-shot a Mew VMAX, because Burning Darkness would start off dealing 180 damage base, meaning it was always enough to KO a Mew VMAX with weakness of course. However, luckily for Mew VMAX players at the time, the same tactic of Judge and Path was enough to keep the Charizard players at bay. So with all this success for Mew VMAX, even with Drapion V, even with Charizard EX, even with Klefki, Creatures Inc. clearly wasn't very happy. So they went to counter Mew VMAX again. And this time my jaw dropped, because I couldn't believe what they printed. Mew VMAX players were forced to adapt again. When Paldea Evolved released, it had Spiritomb in it, a basic Pokemon with the Fettered in Misfortune ability, which would turn off all V Pokemon abilities while it was in play. And it had a handy attack Fade Out, which would return itself to the hand for 1 colorless energy, so Mew couldn't Dreepy lock it in the active like it would for Pumpkaboo before. This single-handedly would stop Mew VMAX decks from drawing any card, and since it could sit on the bench unlike Klefki, it was very splashable. Meaning this could instantly brick a Mew VMAX from doing anything. Or at least the old school turbo, double turbo energy builds would get bricked. See, in a funny twist of fate, Fusion Strike energy all the way back from earlier, if it was attached to Genesect, would allow Genesect to draw cards still, since Fusion Strike energy, if it is attached to a Fusion Strike Pokemon, would prevent all effects of your opponent's abilities done to the Pokemon it's attached to, so Fettered in Misfortune wouldn't work on a Genesect. So this led the player base to start playing a little hybrid version of Mew VMAX, where you play 1 or less of Sparkle and 2 Fusion energies, just so you could put 1 on 2 different Genesects, so you could still draw some cards if you really needed to. Or some people would start to lean in a full Fusion Strike style build again, where they would use Iskew to carry Spiritomb on the bench, while having Lost City in play so you could permanently remove it. Both these style decks saw success, but it cannot be underestimated just how disastrous a well-timed Spiritomb could be for Mew VMAX. After Spiritomb's inclusion onto the metagame, the next event was the 2023 World Championships. And with Lugia V-Star being a victim to the last rotation, it wasn't the same powerhouse as it used to be. This meant Mew VMAX decks were given more license to be aggressive again, but still had to be careful of the rogue Drapions in Lost Box decks or Spiritombs in Gardevoir decks for example. And with Mew's best finish being a World's Top 8, could it top it? Because this is the last World Championships it would have to compete in before it got rotated. And with all these hard counters in format, and people still hating it to no end, could Mew VMAX do better than a top 8? Well, to be fair, it only went and did the unthinkable, won it all. Vance Kelly was able to topple Tord Redclef in the finals with his Mew VMAX deck versus Gardevoir. And it was poetic, because after all the strange trials and tribulations that Mew had to go through playing 4 Path to the Peaks, Dreepy, Aerodactyl V-Star, and all those other silly things, it was an old school Fusion Strike build that was able to take it all home, featuring Meloetta and Oricorio back in the deck. And a few months later, Mew VMAX sailed off into the sunset of rotation, but it was still able to get some big finishes, like winning the Utrecht Special Event, winning a Liverpool Regional, 3rd place at Portland, 5th place at Stuttgart, and winning the Lille Regional Championships as well. But that was all she wrote for Mew VMAX. It was set to rotate, forced to go into binders, the most unstoppable deck of all time. A deck so strong the card creators couldn't even stop it from doing what it wanted to do, which was win games. Mew VMAX Fusion Box. And thanks to this video sponsor Pokédex, we will be giving away this whole donk deck that you can see here right now, that uses Iron Valiant and Petulant to end games, well, as early as turn 1. If you want to win this deck, all you got to do is like the video, subscribe, and go follow Pokédex for you on Twitter. Send them a tweet saying Bert sent you, and on the 9th of December, one of you will be randomly selected to win. So much thanks to Pokédex for sponsoring this video. And why don't you check out this video here, where I go through every Pokemon's best ever competitive card.